Hi, friends. Welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to True Crime Echoes. This is a space where we don't just retell true crime stories. We try to understand them, the psychology, the patterns, the quiet warning signs, the cases that linger, that echo, the ones that make us rethink how much we really know about the people around us. Today's story is about a woman who didn't just fool people, she disarmed them. Louise Peete lived a life of manipulation, reinvention, and murder, all while keeping up the image of a polished, proper lady. But behind the charm was something much darker and far more dangerous. This one is disturbing not just for what she did, but for how long she got away with it. So get comfortable, settle in, because this story takes us across decades, cities, and identities. And by the end, you might find yourself questioning not just Louise, but human nature itself. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Woman Behind the Mask. From Southern Belle to Cold-Blooded Killer. Hi, friends. How are you today? I hope you're doing well, or at the very least, I hope you're finding a quiet moment to just breathe. And if you're not, I want you to know this time, right here, right now, it's just for us. No pressure, no rush, just a story and maybe a bit of reflection. So welcome back to True Crime Echoes. And if you're new here, hi, I'm really glad you're here. My name is Your Name, and on this channel we dive into stories from real life that aren't just disturbing, they linger. Stories that echo through time, through headlines, through memory. Some are bizarre, some are heartbreaking, and some are just hard to believe. Today's story is one of those. Honestly, I've been sitting with it for a while. Not because it's the bloodiest or the most famous, but because of the woman at the center of it. Louise Peete. At first glance, Louise could have been anyone. A well-dressed woman with southern charm, sharp eyes, and a smile that disarmed nearly everyone she met. But behind that polished appearance was something else, something cold, calculated, and quietly lethal. What makes Louise's story different isn't just the crime she committed, it's the way she kept slipping through the cracks, how she reinvented herself over and over again until no one could tell who she really was. A grieving widow, a socialite, a devoted wife, a housekeeper, a killer. This isn't just a story about murder, it's a story about masks, about charm as a weapon, about what happens when someone realizes they can lie, manipulate, and destroy, and no one will stop them. And I think what chills me most about Louise Peete is how long she got away with it. So today, we're going to walk through her life together. From her privileged beginnings in the Deep South to the string of suspicious deaths that followed her like a shadow, all the way to the final moment that justice finally caught up. Let's begin. Chapter 2. The Beginning of Louise Peete. Louise Peete was born on September 20th, 1880 in Bienville, Louisiana. That's not a place that pops up often in crime stories, but maybe that's what makes it so eerie. Because there, in a quiet southern town with magnolia trees and slow-talking locals, a girl was born into privilege and into something much darker. Her father was a wealthy newspaper publisher, powerful, well-connected, and Louise. She had everything a girl could want in that era. Fine dresses, private tutors, a sense of status she didn't earn but quickly learned to weaponize. From a very young age, she understood one thing clearly. Charm could open doors, and lies could keep them open. And she was brilliant at both. By the time she was a teenager, Louise had already learned how to manipulate the people around her. She didn't scream or threaten, she didn't beg. She seduced, disarmed, and maneuvered her way into whatever she wanted. Teachers, classmates, even administrators. At 15, she was sent to a prestigious private school in New Orleans, but she didn't last long. She was expelled not once, but twice. First for stealing from her classmates, then for something more scandalous, inappropriate sexual conduct with male students. And this wasn't just some teen rebellion. It was a pattern, a warning. But the thing about Louise was she always knew how to move on, reinvent herself, pretend the past didn't exist, or worse, convince people it never happened at all. That's one of the strangest things about her story. There's so little we know about her early family life, about her mother, for instance. It's like she erased certain pieces of her past on purpose. Maybe she did, or maybe others did it for her. Either way, it's important to realize Louise didn't descend into darkness suddenly. It wasn't one big event that pushed her over the edge. It was gradual, calculated, almost like she was testing how far she could go before anyone would stop her, and no one did. By the early 1900s, Louise had moved on from high school disgrace to high society charm. In 1903, she married Henry Bosley, a traveling salesman. From the outside, it looked like a standard, even boring marriage. But while Henry was away for work, sometimes weeks at a time, Louise was entertaining other men. And when Henry came home early one day, he caught her. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was absolute. Within weeks, Henry fell into a deep depression. And shortly after, he ended his own life. That's the first time someone close to Louise died under tragic circumstances. And sadly, it would not be the last. What's striking here isn't just the affair, it's her reaction. There was no real grief, no withdrawal from public life. Louise moved cities, moved on, like she had simply outgrown another chapter and was ready to write a new one. And that's exactly what she did. Next, we'll follow her to Shreveport, Louisiana, where her charm evolved into something even more dangerous. Because now she wasn't just looking for attention, she was looking for power. Chapter 3: The Mask of Reinvention. After Henry Bosley's death, Louise did what she always did. When things got messy, she disappeared. She packed her things, left town, and landed in Shreveport, Louisiana, a place where no one knew her name, her past, or the fact that her husband had taken his own life just weeks earlier. But Louise wasn't mourning. She wasn't rebuilding. She was calculating. She needed income, yes, but more than that, she needed control. So in Shreveport, she found what she believed was the easiest route: high-class sex work. Not just for the money, though, that mattered. Louise saw it as leverage, a way to manipulate powerful men when they were at their most vulnerable. And while they were distracted, she'd steal money, valuables, anything she could quietly pocket before walking out the door in silk and satisfaction. For 2 years, that was her game. She charmed, seduced, and stole, and no one seemed to notice or care. To them, she was just another beautiful face with a tragic backstory. And Louise knew exactly how to sell that story. But like everything with her, it didn't last long. By 1911, she wanted more. More distance from her past. More power over her future. So she changed her name. Again. This time she became Louise M. Golds. It was a rebrand, really. Like she was launching a new business, except she was the business. She moved to Boston and told people she was a 19-year-old heiress from Texas, recently escaped from a convent where her cruel, aristocratic family had locked her away. There was no internet, no background checks, just charm gossip and your ability to make a lie sound beautiful. And Louise was a master at that. She embedded herself in Boston high society, convincing an affluent family to take her in. Almost like an adult adoption, though no one ever called it that. She dressed the part, spoke with grace, and told just enough half-truths to seem mysterious, not suspicious. But it wasn't long before the stealing started again. She ran up massive bills at high-end department stores, all under the family's name. She skimmed money from their friends, even their staff. She was bold, but she was sloppy, and someone caught on. The family, embarrassed to have been duped, offered her a deal: leave town quietly, and they wouldn't press charges. Louise agreed. Of course she did. For her, it was just another stage exit, another costume change. This time she set her sights on Texas. In Waco, she met Joe Apple, a wealthy oil man with more diamonds than sense. Literally. His belt buckles, shirt buttons, even his cufflinks were encrusted with diamonds. He loved showing off his wealth, and Louise, she loved taking it. They met, they flirted, they moved fast. And then just 1 week after their introduction, Joe Apple was found dead, shot, and all his diamonds gone. It didn't take long for fingers to point at Louise. The two had been seen together multiple times. She was arrested and charged with murder. And for the first time, Louise stood trial, Not as a victim, not as a socialite, but as a suspected killer. Now here's the part that still stuns me. She got away with it. She told the jury that Joe had tried to rape her, that she acted in self-defense. There were no diamonds found in her possession, no physical evidence to link her directly to the theft, and the jury believed her. She was found not guilty and released. Now, I'm not saying self-defense doesn't happen. Of course it does. And if her story were true, she would have deserved that verdict. But as you'll see in the chapters ahead, this was just the beginning. Because something in Louise shifted after that trial. Or maybe it was always there hiding beneath the surface. A part of her that realized she could kill and walk free. And if she could get away with murder once, why stop there? Chapter 4, Another City, Another Life. After walking free from a murder trial, most people would keep a low profile. Maybe move on quietly, try to live a different kind of life, if not for morality, then at least out of fear. But Louise Peete. She saw it as validation. To her, it wasn't luck. It was proof. Proof that she could do whatever she wanted and still come out clean. That her charm, her lies, and her perfectly crafted image were stronger than the law. Stronger than justice. Stronger than death itself. So she moved again. This time she landed in Dallas. And somehow, though, by now, maybe we shouldn't be surprised, she met another man within days of arriving. His name was Harry. He was a hotel night clerk. Not exactly a millionaire, but useful in his own way. He worked at the St. George Hotel, which was considered upscale at the time. Louise married him quickly. And I don't know if it was love, probably not. But what I do know is that within months, tragedy struck again. One night, while Harry was on duty, a major theft occurred. $20,000 worth of jewelry vanished from the hotel safe. It was a big scandal. Headlines: Suspicion, Damage Control. Naturally, police questioned Harry. After all, he had access. He was working that night. But they couldn't pin anything on him. There was no evidence. No missing jewelry found in his room. No strange deposits in his bank account, so they cleared him. But the damage was already done. Being suspected of theft, especially in that era, wasn't just humiliating, it was life-altering. And Harry took it hard. Very hard. According to accounts at the time, he fell into a depression he never came out of. And not long after, he ended his own life. And here we are again. Another man. Another sudden death. Another step in Louise's path that somehow gets washed away. What's haunting is how people kept believing she was just unlucky, that these were coincidences, that she simply had the misfortune of being surrounded by fragile, unstable men. But really, were they fragile, or did they get too close to something they weren't supposed to see? Louise left Dallas soon after Harry's death, and once again she reinvented herself. New name, new backstory, new wardrobe. It was like clockwork. Whenever the past got too heavy, she just dropped it and walked into a fresh start. This time she headed west to Denver. And by this point, if you're starting to see the pattern, you're not alone. Death followed Louise like a shadow, but never too close. Never close enough to catch her. It was always just far enough away for her to explain it, deny it, smile through it, and the people around her, they kept falling for it. In Denver, she married again, a man named Richard Peete. He was a salesman, quiet, dependable, and together they had a daughter, Frances Ann, though everyone called her Betty. For a while, it looked like things might finally settle down, that Louise might actually be building something real. But by now, we know better. Because Louise Peete didn't build things. She took them, and her past. It was just starting to catch up. Chapter 5. The Man in the Basement. By 1920, Louise had become an expert at shedding skins. The moment life started to look too ordinary or too inconvenient, she'd vanish and reappear somewhere new with a new name, a new backstory, and a new plan. After 4 years of marriage to Richard Peete and the birth of their daughter Betty, she simply walked away. Left the man who stood by her. Left the child who knew her only as mother. Just gone. She moved to Los Angeles, and for Louise, LA wasn't just a change of scenery, it was an opportunity. The city was booming, mansions were being built, fortunes were being made and lost overnight. It was exactly the kind of place where someone like Louise could blend in and stand out at the same time. And that's where she met Jacob Denton. Jacob was everything Louise had always chased, wealthy, reclusive, recently widowed. He'd made a fortune in mining, and though he wasn't flashy like some of her past companions, he had something more valuable: real estate. Specifically, a 14-room mansion in one of the wealthiest areas of Los Angeles. Louise found her way to him through a classified ad. He was looking to rent out the house, and she inquired about becoming a tenant. She told him she was a wealthy widow, refined, respectable. And somehow she managed to convince him not only to let her live there, but to lower the rent from $350 a month down to just $75 for a 14-room mansion. It would be almost funny if it weren't so tragic. She moved in on May 26th, and not long after Jacob disappeared. Just like that. One day he was there, the next he was gone. Louise told the neighbors he'd gone away on business, that he'd be back soon, that everything was fine. She even told the same story to Jacob's friends, who came by asking questions. Sometimes she said he was ill, other times that he'd had an accident. Depending on who asked, her story changed, but her tone never did. Calm, polite, in control. And while Jacob was supposedly out of town, Louise settled into his home like it had always been hers. She drove his car, wore his jewelry, rented out the rooms to strangers, and pocketed the rent. She even forged his signature to access his bank account and safety deposit box. When a bank teller raised an eyebrow at the shaky handwriting, Louise claimed Jacob had lost his arm in a violent argument with a Spanish-looking woman who'd shot him, that she'd helped him sign the papers with his non-dominant hand, and the bank believed her. She told someone else that both his arm and leg had been amputated. In another version, he was recovering from facial injuries. Every time the story changed, it got more dramatic, more bizarre. But people wanted to believe her because Louise knew how to perform sincerity. That's what makes this story so disturbing. It's not just that she lied, it's how easy it was for her. But the mask began to crack when Jacob's teenage daughter, who had briefly lived in the mansion, started asking questions. She hadn't seen or heard from her father in weeks. And something about Louise didn't sit right with her, so she hired a lawyer. That move changed everything. The lawyer showed up asking for Jacob's records. Louise stalled, saying she'd provide them soon, but instead of handing over anything, she quietly packed up her belongings and fled the city, leaving behind nothing but questions and whispers. She returned to Denver and moved back in with Richard, her ex-husband claiming she wanted to be a family again, that she missed him, that she'd changed. But back in LA, the walls were closing in. On September 23, 1920, Jacob Denton's daughter went back to the mansion. She was tired of waiting, tired of excuses, and so she searched the house herself. And that's when she found him. Her father's decomposing body was buried beneath the basement staircase, wrapped in blankets, tied up with cords, covered in layers of dirt. The autopsy revealed what the surface tried to hide. Jacob had been shot in the head and strangled. It was brutal, intentional, personal. And now, Louise Peete wasn't just a woman with a suspicious trail behind her. She was a wanted murderer. Police tracked her down in Denver and brought her in for questioning. At first, she insisted Jacob wasn't dead at all, that the body in the basement was someone else, a double, she called it. She even suggested Jacob had staged his own death. When that didn't work, she returned to her earlier story, the mysterious Spanish woman. The amputation, the embarrassment, the secrecy, but none of it made sense anymore. Jacob's body was intact. The cause of death was obvious. The motive was clearer than ever: money, property, power. Louise Peete had finally gone too far. But even then, even with a body, a motive, a web of lies unraveling, people still wanted to believe she was innocent. Maybe it was the way she spoke, the way she carried herself, or maybe it was something darker, something magnetic. The kind of presence that draws you in, even when every instinct is screaming for you to run. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. And as she stood trial for the death of Jacob Denton, the press couldn't get enough. The courtroom was packed. Spectators lined up to see her. Newspapers sold out. Because this wasn't just a case anymore. It was a spectacle, a performance. And Louise. She knew her role by heart. Chapter 6. A Lady Behind Bars. When Louise Peete went to trial in January of 1921, she didn't walk into that courtroom like a woman fighting for her life. She walked in like she was attending a social event. People lined the hallways just to see her. Not because they were angry or outraged, but because they were captivated. They wanted to see what she was wearing, how she smiled, what she might say next. The newspapers covered her like she was a movie star, not a murder suspect. And Louise, she played the part. She sat in court with her chin held high, dressed in black, with delicate gloves like a grieving widow instead of an accused killer. And in a way, that's what made her so dangerous. She had an uncanny ability to disarm people, to make you forget the body in the basement and focus instead on the curl in her hair or the tilt of her voice. But beneath the surface, the evidence was mounting. The forged bank documents, the false signatures, the multiple conflicting stories she gave about Jacob Denton's disappearance. The fact that she was living in his home, spending his money, pawning his jewelry, all while he lay buried just a few feet beneath her feet. Still, Louise stuck to her story. She denied everything, and when the lies didn't work, she changed tactics. She said she had no idea Jacob was even dead. She claimed she was scared, that she'd been manipulated herself. She told the jury she was innocent, but the jury wasn't buying it anymore. In February of 1921, just weeks after the trial began, Louise Peete was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. And when the verdict was read, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse into a heap of regret like some people do. She simply nodded like she'd been expecting it all along. That composure followed her into prison. At San Quentin and later at the California Institution for Women, Louise didn't act like an inmate. She acted like a guest, a long-term visitor in a place that couldn't quite hold her spirit. She volunteered in the prison garden, tending flowers with the same grace she'd once used to arrange her jewelry. She worked as a dental assistant, wrote for the prison newsletter, made friends, gained favor. She knew how to make people like her even inside prison walls. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. She flourished in prison. She adapted, charmed, even thrived. It's as if the sentence didn't really sink in, or worse, as if it didn't matter. Louise didn't view life the way most people did. Consequences were temporary, identities were disposable, and time was just something to outlast. She served 18 years. 18 years for the murder of Jacob Denton. And then she was released. Paroled for good behavior at the age of 59. That should have been the end of her story. A full life behind her. A second chance, maybe, if you believe in that kind of thing. But with Louise, Peete endings were never really endings. They were just the beginning of another performance. Chapter 7. A Quiet Return. A Familiar Shadow. When Louise Peete walked out of prison in 1939, she was 59 years old, 18 years behind bars. A life sentence reduced to time served, and just like that she was free. Free to breathe fresh air, free to walk down the street, free to become whoever she wanted to be again. You'd think after almost 2 decades in prison, someone might take a step back, reflect, start fresh in some quiet, humble way. But Louise, she didn't see herself as a former inmate. She saw herself as misunderstood, wronged even. Her punishment had simply been an inconvenience, nothing more. Upon her release, she was taken in by Jessie Marcy, a woman who had lobbied for her freedom. Jessie truly believed Louise had been rehabilitated. She even offered her a place to live under one condition, that Louise would work as her live-in housekeeper. It seemed like a sweet deal, a second chance, a woman helping another woman re-enter society. But just a week later, Jessie was dead. Official cause, natural causes, that's what the paperwork said. But still, something about it didn't sit right. Healthy 1 week, dead the next, with Louise Peete in the house. it was the start of something that would happen again and again. After Jesse's death, Louise moved in with her probation officer, Emily Latham, a well-meaning older woman who believed in rehabilitation. Emily also needed help around the house, so she welcomed Louise in as both housekeeper and nurse. And just like before, it didn't take long. Emily died of a sudden heart attack in 1943. No suspicion, no autopsy that led anywhere. But now that's two women both who took Louise in both who died not long after. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. Either way, no one seemed to ask the right questions, and Louise, she just kept moving forward. By now she had changed her name to Anna Lee. It was part of her reinvention shed the past step into a new identity, and somehow it worked. No one around her seemed to know she had ever served time for murder. She was just Anna now. Quiet, respectable, helpful. That's what's so terrifying about Louise Peete. She didn't need a mask. She was the mask. After Emily's death, she moved in with an old friend from prison, Margaret Logan, and Margaret's husband, Arthur, who was suffering from dementia. Margaret believed in Louise's innocence. She thought Louise had been unfairly convicted all those years ago. So when Louise asked if she could live with them, Margaret said yes. In exchange, Louise would help around the house, especially with Arthur's care. And for a while, that's what she did. But then, Margaret started to disappear socially at first. She stopped showing up to neighborhood events, stopped answering letters, stopped being seen. And 3 days after Margaret was last seen, Louise committed Arthur to a state hospital. She told neighbors Arthur had become violent, that he had attacked Margaret, that he was dangerous, unstable. She even said he'd bitten off her nose during one of his rages and that Margaret was now in hiding, too ashamed to be seen. It was grotesque, and somehow people believed it. Louise had set the stage again just like she always did: distract, deflect, control the narrative, and by the time anyone started asking real questions, she was already living in Margaret and Arthur's house as if it were her own, wearing Margaret's clothes, spending the couple's money, forging checks. It was a pattern we'd seen before, but for some reason no one had seen it clearly enough, not yet. Louise Peete was back in the world, and death was back at her side. Chapter 8. The Body Beneath the Avocado Tree. By mid-1944, Margaret Logan had been missing for weeks, but if you asked Louise Peete, or rather Anna Lee, there was no reason to panic. She told the neighbors Margaret was still around, just recovering, that she'd been disfigured by her husband Arthur during one of his violent outbursts, that he'd bitten her nose off in a fit of rage, and now Margaret was too ashamed to show her face in public. And somehow people accepted that. It sounds ridiculous now, I know, but at the time it worked. Louise had built her entire life on being believable, on saying something so outrageous with such calm certainty that people wouldn't question it, not because it made sense, but because she did. Meanwhile, Louise had already committed Arthur to a state hospital. She told the staff he was unstable, dangerous, and needed constant supervision. She signed the papers, she handed him off, and then she moved into the Logan house alone. Just like that. Once again, she stepped into someone else's life and quietly erased them. She began spending Margaret and Arthur's money, forging checks, buying expensive things for herself and her new husband, Lee Judson, a banker she'd recently married. He had no idea who she really was. He thought her name was Anna, and as far as he knew, she was just a soft-spoken, middle-aged woman who had lost some people in her life and wanted to start over. Louise didn't tell him about the murder conviction, about Jacob Denton, about prison, about the bodies, about the patterns. She just smiled, and Lee believed her. They lived together in the Logan home. They hosted dinners. They acted like nothing was wrong. But money started to run dry. And then, in December 1944, Arthur Logan died in the hospital. It should have been the end of something, but it was just the beginning of the unraveling. You see, the checks bearing Arthur's signature were still being cashed after his death. That was the red flag. The bank flagged it immediately. They knew something was off. A dead man doesn't write checks. So they contacted the police, and the police paid Louise and Lee a visit. At first, it was just a routine questioning. Just to clear up some inconsistencies, Louise explained it all away, calm, collected. She said Margaret was out of town, that the checks were authorized before Arthur passed, that it was all just a mix-up. The police didn't press, at least not yet, but they promised they'd be back. And when they returned a few weeks later, they asked a simple question. "Can we look around the property?" Louise said yes. They searched the house, walked through the rooms, then moved to the backyard. And that's when they found it. A shallow grave beneath the avocado tree. Inside was the body of Margaret Logan, wrapped, decaying, and buried like she'd never mattered. Her skull was fractured. She had been shot in the back of the neck. There was no violent struggle, no confrontation that got out of hand. This was an execution, and Louise Peete. She was arrested immediately. During questioning, she claimed Arthur had killed Margaret before he was committed, that it was one of his violent fits, just like she had warned the neighbors about. She even told investigators to go door to door to ask around. She said everyone knows he was abusive. It was honestly a clever move. She'd planted the story months earlier. She had built a lie with just enough truth for it to sound plausible. But it didn't work this time. Not anymore. The police didn't believe her, and neither did the district attorney. Louise Peete was charged with murder for the second time. Her husband Lee was also arrested. But there wasn't enough evidence to tie him directly to the crime. He was released. And the very next day, he jumped to his death from the 9th floor of an office building in Los Angeles. Just like that, another body, another man destroyed in her orbit. And for the first time, something cracked in Louise. When she was told about Lee's death, she cried. Not performative tears, real ones. She told the press that she blamed herself, that his death was her fault. But was it grief, or was it shame? Maybe the only person Louise ever truly cared about was herself. Maybe the tears weren't for Lee at all, but for the end of the act. The final curtain coming down, because this time she wasn't walking away. She wasn't charming her way out of it. There would be no new city, no new name, no new beginning. Only a trial and the end of the line. Chapter 9. The final curtain. By the time Louise Peete went to trial in 1945, the public's fascination with her had started to fade. The crowds were smaller this time. The newspapers still ran headlines, but the tone had shifted. There wasn't glamour anymore. No curious awe, just weariness, a sense of finality. People had started to see her for what she truly was, not a misunderstood woman or a tragic widow, but a predator. The prosecution made their case with precision. They argued that Louise had killed Margaret Logan to gain control of her home, her finances, and her life. That she had forged checks, pawned belongings, and manipulated the people around her just as she had done before. And they laid out the pattern: Jacob Denton, the suspicious suicides, the trail of bodies. It wasn't just murder. It was method. And the jury saw it. On May 31st, 1945, Louise Peete was found guilty of first-degree murder. But this time there was no life sentence. She was given the death penalty. And in that moment, she didn't flinch. She didn't cry or beg or scream. She was calm, almost eerily so. During sentencing, she sat quietly reading a book on Chinese philosophy titled The Importance of Living. Witnesses later said she only looked up once, just long enough to smirk. Even in her final days, she held on to that quiet, unnerving confidence. She tried to appeal the verdict multiple times. None of them succeeded. The courts weren't interested in second chances anymore, and for once in her life, neither was anyone else. So she waited. And then on April 11th, 1948, the waiting was over. Louise Peete was led to the gas chamber at the California Institution for Women. She walked calmly, not with fear, but with the grace of someone heading to an event she'd RSVP'd to months ago. Maybe she thought she had control over this moment too. Witnesses, over 80 of them, gathered to watch. It was one of the largest groups to ever witness an execution in the state at the time. Maybe they were there for justice, maybe for closure, or maybe just to see the woman who had fooled so many one last time. A prison guard gave her a final nod and said, "Goodbye, good luck. Breathe deep and don't fight the gas." 10 minutes later, Louise Peete was dead. She was the second woman in California history to be executed by the state. And just like that, it was over. But here's the thing, even now, after all the trials, all the lies, and all the death, there's still something about her story that lingers. Not because of who she was, but because of how long she got away with it. She didn't kill in a frenzy. She didn't explode in anger. She planned, she smiled, she waited, and then she took. And somehow people kept opening their doors, kept believing her, kept forgiving her, until one day the consequences finally caught up. But by then the damage had already been done. Chapter 10. Echoes That Remain. Louise Peete's story is one that stays with you not because of how loud it was, but because of how quiet. She didn't leave behind a trail of blood in the way many killers do. There were no mass scenes, no graphic confessions, no moments of rage. Instead, there was stillness, sophistication, control. She slipped through the cracks for decades. She wore pearls while planning theft. She drank tea while spinning lies. She buried people under dirt and charm. And she did it all while convincing the world that she was harmless. That to me is what makes her terrifying. We like to think we can spot evil when it's coming, that it announces itself with fury or chaos. But Louise was a reminder that sometimes the real danger walks in with a smile, says please and thank you, offers to help with the dishes, and waits patiently for the moment you stop paying attention. I've spent hours with this story reading, reflecting, questioning, and even now I still wonder, did she ever feel remorse? Did she believe her own lies, or was it always about survival, one step ahead of the truth? Maybe we'll never really know. But what we do know is this: Louise Peete didn't just take lives, she took trust. And once that's gone, you don't get it back so easily. Thank you for being here with me for this story. If it haunted you a little, good. Some stories should, because they remind us that not all monsters come crashing through the door. Some let themselves in. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you. Truly. Cases like this remind us how powerful image can be, how charm, when weaponized, can silence even the loudest alarm bells, and how sometimes evil doesn't hide in the shadows, it hides in plain sight. I'd love to know what you think about this case. Was Louise a true sociopath, a product of her time, or something more chilling, a master manipulator who knew exactly how to exploit every weakness in the system? Let me know in the comments. I read them. I think about them. And honestly, this channel wouldn't be what it is without you. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing or sharing it with someone who enjoys deep, reflective, true crime storytelling. Until next time, stay safe, trust your instincts, and as always, thank you for listening to True Crime Echoes.